darkness, danger, evil, shadowy entities, shadow governments. Finally, I've done it. I've completed the reading of That Hideous Strength, the third book in the S.Lewis series, the Space Trilogy. It only took me a year, but this has been one of the hardest books I've ever read. More on that later. An interesting fact about the first two books: our narrator's last name is Lewis, and it seems he is actually supposed to represent C.S. Lewis himself, writing this as a biographical story of Elwin Ransom. In the meantime, what exactly is going on in this book? How does it tie in to the first two? I hope you've read the first two books, Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra. If not, read them before you watch this video. Or carry on, your choice. But the following descriptions may just be a bit bewildering without reading the first two books. In Out of the Silent Planet, we meet our protagonist, Elwin Ransom, who winds up kidnapped and taken to the planet Malacandra to be a sacrifice for the gods of the planet. But, in the end, that isn't what the gods wanted another human for. They actually wanted a contrast who could tell the truth about our antagonists, Edward Weston and Dick Devine. After escaping into the wilds of Malacandra, Ransom, a philologist, a specialist in languages, begins meeting the locals and learns the main central language of Malacandra. He eventually learns of the Eldila, which seem to be angelic beings, who are there to protect the planet from intruders. They are led by an Oyarsa, who is, from all appearances, an archangel, responsible for overseeing the planet, the Eldila, and everything about the planet. It was the Oyarsa who wanted another being from Earth, Fulcandra, the silent planet, to talk with, mostly regarding Weston and Devine, as he mistrusted them. After learning of the truth from Ransom, that Weston and Devine have no good intentions, in fact, they plan on a little colonialization, the Oyarsa of Malacandra orders them all to leave and return to Earth. But upon arrival, their spacecraft will be unmade, as the Oyarsa calls it, so they mustn't dawdle on the way, or they will be unmade in space. They must get home, land, and get out of the ship, or they will be unmade as well. The Oyarsa sends them on their way, but he blesses Ransom as a friend. Upon landing, Devine and Weston get out of the ship and run away, quickly leaving Ransom to fend for himself. Ransom barely makes it away in time before the ship vanishes in light and noise. During his time conversing with the Oyarsa of Malacandra, there are more Oyarsa, Ransom learns of the Bent One, who appears to be, by all appearances anyway, Satan, and he learns of his Dark Eldila, who appear to be the demons, and they are responsible for Earth, and they have not been heard from in a long time, thus the silent in Silent Planet. The Bent One and his Dark Eldila must never pass beyond the orbit of the moon. Remember these characters. They will be very important later in That Hideous Strength. There is so much more to Out of the Silent Planet. That was just a 100,000-foot overview, a skim of the story. But what of Perelandra, the second book in the trilogy? On Earth, there is a war going on. World War II, and the situation is not very pleasant, as anyone who has studied history will know. Very possibly this war is the doing of the Bent One, the Dark Oyarsa, the devil. Lewis, after getting off a train and then running a gauntlet of unaccustomed dark and very frightening thoughts, read the book to learn the true origin of these thoughts, arrives at the country cottage Ransom is living in. However, though he was expecting Lewis, Ransom had to make a quick, unexpected visit to Cambridge College, and is not at home. Therefore, Lewis enters the cottage and meets Oyarsa, the Eldila whom we met in the first book, Out of the Silent Planet. Eldila are mostly invisible unless they choose to take a form. Ransom returns home shortly after and informs Lewis that he is preparing to travel, with the aid of the Oyarsa, to the planet Paralandra. He travels to Paralandra in a suspended animation in a spacecraft not much larger than a coffin. After arriving and learning the ways of Paralandra and meeting the only obvious inhabitant, who seems to be a new Eve but green-skinned, Ransom spots a very familiar spaceship. Weston, remember Weston, arrives, and obviously is possessed by the Dark Eldila, or even by the Bent One himself, as Weston's personality has become extremely dark. After a long protracted struggle during which Ransom is injured, Ransom manages to defeat and in fact kills Weston. After this, Ransom meets the new Adam, also green-skinned, and is taken home to Earth by the Eldila. On Earth, the silent planet, Ransom tells the tale of what happened to him to Lewis. Fast forward a few years now to That Hideous Strength. The third book in the Space Trilogy is better than twice the length of both of the first two books combined. Our original protagonist, Ransom, is nowhere to be seen. Instead, we meet up with an ambitious academic ladder climber named Mark Studdock and his equally academic wife, Jane, who has placed her academic career in low gear for their marriage, and she somewhat resents having to do this. Mark is a fellow at the fictional, forever on the edge of debt, Bracton College. He is bored with all of the stale, old fuddy-duddies of Bracton. Eventually, he is headhunted by Lord Feverstone to the NICE. What is the NICE? NICE stands for the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments. The name alone should be enough to give you the willies. Feverstone is none other than Dick Devine, now a lord in the House of Lords. He is one of the two villains from Out of the Silent Planet. And you know, with his involvement, it's not going to be good. The NICE is a shadowy organization which is on its way to becoming the true body running England, and is worming its way into authority in other places as well, including France. They are highly dangerous and run by the Head. A decapitated head which has been liberated from its body by the French on the guillotine, and reanimated by Dr. Philostrato, or at least he believes he is responsible for reanimating the head. It is, in fact, the macrobes, not microbes, but macrobes, who are making it look alive. Who or what are the macrobes? They are none other than the Dark Eldila we have learned of in the previous novels. Eventually, our old protagonist, Elwyn Ransom, shows up and rescues the Studdocks, convincing Jane to become a Christian, and it is intimated that Mark does so in the end as well. We also meet an awakened Merlinus Ambrosius, the same Merlin who was counselor and friend to Arthur, King of the Britons. Eventually, the Oyarsa of the various planets, Malacandra, which is Mars, Paralandra, which is Venus, and several others come to Earth, which they can now do so, since the Bent One has broken the rules and traveled, by possessing Weston, to Paralandra. They may now break the rule of not visiting Earth. They use Merlin and force their authority and power through him, destroying the Nice. The last individual of the Nice to die in the novel is Lord Feverstone, Dick Devine. Dies in an avalanche which finishes off all of the evildoers and the second of the antagonists from Out of the Silent Planet. The story arc is complete. Mark and Jane reconcile, and Ransom is returned to Paralandra to heal from the injuries which he obtained there in his battle with Weston. Now that I have given you the 10,000-foot overview, let's talk writing style. The writing is typical of C.S. Lewis. An academic style with a number of large words, strange phrases, and in this case Lewis even peppered in a bit of Latin, which he was, of course, fluent in. Thankfully, the Latin was translated in footnotes. The words and phrases do not fully detract from the story at all, though for some it may, as the writing is a very old style. And here is a picture of a couple of pages that I marked up in order to look up words later, and even some of the margin markings where I wanted to highlight something that was of particular meaning to me. Lessons to me, if you will. The content was remarkable. As Lewis said in the introduction to That Hideous Strength, one of the things he wished to accomplish, beyond sharing his faith in a roundabout way, was to make the same point he made in his non-fiction book, The Abolition of Man, which I will cover in another video. So overall, if you like dystopian fiction, I'm sure you would enjoy this novel. It stands alone, as the other two do, but to gain a better understanding of what's in this book, you would want to read the other two parts of the trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet, the first book, and Paralandra, the second book. Now why, oh why, did I have such a hard time reading this one? It certainly wasn't the writing style. I've read other Lewis books, and the style is basically the same from book to book. Difficult to read in many cases. No, it was the overall darkness of the story, the extreme tension. These tensions and darkness made it so at times I couldn't even make through a complete chapter in one sitting, even though the content was very engaging. One example of the darkness and tension which had me closing down the book periodically right in the middle of chapters revolves around a particular female character, Miss Hardcastle, also known as the Fairy. She is head of the Nice's own police force. Yep, they have their own police force, and they are nasty, not above killing, operating with impunity from the real British police forces, though they feign cooperation. She dresses in leather and smokes a cheroot, a kind of short, skinny cigar, and it's unfiltered. The Fairy delights in torture, and is most disappointed when she is forbidden from torturing Mark at one point. But she gets special delight and takes extremely perverse pleasure in torturing women, and she uses her cheroot at one point to begin a torture session on Jane, which is interrupted when they get mobbed and Jane escapes, though not before sustaining a number of injuries to her chest and shoulders from the cigar. Well, as you can see, the tension and violence can be very thick. It is interesting to note the writing of this series started as a challenge between Lewis and his good friend J.R.R. Tolkien. In the challenge, Tolkien was to write a time travel story, while Lewis was to write a space travel story. Tolkien never wrote his part of the challenge, but Lewis expanded his story into the Space Trilogy. That is the end of the book review portion of this video. Now I am going to venture into politics and religion. So, if you dislike this, or you consider everyone who talks about subjects like this to be a conspiracy theorist, I hate that term, you may wish to end the video now. Otherwise, stick around for a few. So what's next? Politics and religion? Say what? Yes, I have stated it before in other videos, but I think either C.S. Lewis was some kind of a prophet, or he knew all too well how to read past history, combine that with what was current news in his day to come up with a kind of realistic prediction for the future. I am referring to the NICE, the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, the shadowy organization from That Hideous Strength. In reading That Hideous Strength, the NICE hit me to have extremely similar qualities to another organization, a real one that exists in the current day, the 2020s, and has been around for roughly 50 years. Just change the letters N, I, C, and E to W, E, and F instead, and you get the idea of where I'm going with this. They have so very much in common. From drastic and dangerous financial reforms which would affect the little people but not the big ones, to infiltrating and taking over governments, financial institutions, schools, medical institutions, hospitals, etc. They also have a tendency toward dangerous medical experiments financed by lunatic wealthy men, and end goals of depopulating the earth drastically. Where could Lewis's inspiration for the NICE have come from? Lewis's training, especially with his involvement with Oxford and Cambridge, would have given him a deep knowledge of history. It was, after all, a subject that was taught deeper than we teach it today, if at all. He would have looked to the terrible exploits of tyrants, such as Antiochus Epiphanes, for his brutality, especially toward the Jews, Julius Caesar, for his no-holds-barred attacks across Europe, and his eventual takeover of government, or Genghis Khan and his killing sprees. Then there is the more recent history of the late 19th century and into the first almost half of the 20th century, of which he had first-hand intimate experience, especially with World War I. He would have seen the rise of social Darwinism, a belief that some races, especially those who were not white, were inferior, and that there were superior races, especially those who were blond-haired and blue-eyed. And there was also, hand in hand with this, a hideous belief in a need for extremely dangerous, often painful medical experiments, coupled to a desire to eradicate and to sterilize those considered to be feeble-minded or weak physically. Well, you get the picture, and it sure isn't pretty. There is also the horror of the writings of another lunatic, Marx. These may have also crossed his mind when writing That Hideous Strength. Throughout history, there have been many dangerous tyrants and would-be tyrants who have risen and would rule the world. From Lenin to Stalin and their useful idiots, Yes, I know that phrase may never have actually been spoken by Stalin, but it still applies. To Hitler, with his supporting cabal of people such as Göring, Goebbels, and Bormann, and many others, they also had their useful idiots. To Castro and his saddest soldier, Che Guevara. To Pol Pot, Chairman Mao, and even today, Xi Jinping. This world is never out of danger, never was out of danger, and even today the danger is close at hand, and for those with open eyes it is easy to see. But who would be the next group of wannabe tyrants, and who is their cabal of supporters and stable of useful idiot sheep? We can see many wannabe tyrants today. We can also see their cabal of supporters and useful idiot sheep. But more important than who is how do we deal with them? We have to learn to recognize their activities and stop them before they get too far. But we cannot also rely on simply electing politicians, then wiping our hands of it. Then, when they don't do anything, we have no right to whine. Washington, London, Ottawa, and other capitals will not deal with it. They are too deeply penetrated by those who are simply in it for the dollars. We need to be running and getting to all areas of office. We need to be elected into school boards at the local level, up to federal office. Then we must stand firm and reject the dollars that are offered to us. We must reject the threats. You have to stand firm. But is it already too late? One final thing. Perhaps it should be really the first thing. You need to get down on your knees and learn of the Lord Jesus.